Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Now you feel better. Soon, I was reading in Norway that they've eliminated all COVID restrictions. But yet the Swiss seem to be getting a little rough with their population, as well as some of the other countries. But let's go forward.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, it does seem to be a very iffy world these days. But it'll all get straightened out. And I think a lot of it is coming to the forefront now. It seems every day there are more and more people, even with our own CDC, where the scientific board advised that there should be no booster shots, but whoever was in the administration at the CDC there overruled it and said, no, we're going to go ahead with it. So over the scientific panel that said, no, it's not needed. So there's a lot of things that need to be straightened out, and they're going to be straightened out in the coming days, weeks, and hopefully not months, too much longer. I'm hoping we'll see the One Cup, One Life, the gift that Mr. Kesh gave to China. That video will be played or maybe enhanced or changed a little bit, but that's a beautiful video to show everyone. And I think Andreas has put a link into the chat for me. I'm going to play that clip at the end, Alex. So we will see Mr. Kesh's gift to the nation of China originally in January, I think, of 2020. Welcome, Alex.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. I really, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the North American Corona team meeting on Sunday afternoon. We are still the North American Corona team meeting because we're 21 months into this pandemic. And this is not really a show of commentary. This is a show of learning. And as we bring all the Kesh foundations together, we find that we have expanded beyond the limits of North America, which we say is Canada, US, and Mexico. But there are a lot of developments that are going on to bring peace to this world. And fundamental to that is the One Nation, One Planet initiative brought about by the Universal Council. So the first comment that I would like to make is a compliment to you, Mark. One of the things about knowledge is that as you gain the knowledge, the benefits of gaining the knowledge show themselves. And so it's not what we are, it's what we're going to be. And one of the things that we're going to be is exemplary citizens on this planet. And so one of the ways to do that is to step up our game. So the first compliment is to you, Mark, in stepping up your game and running an extremely professional show. And I'm extremely grateful for all your work. and it's never said often enough. So I have said it before, but I really want to emphasize that again today. So
Well,
thank you, Mark.
thank you, Alex. But if it wasn't for my soul, I don't think I would be here. As we know that the physicality follows the totality. So it's all working with the souls, and there's something going on in the background that they want us to know more. And hopefully more knowledge seekers will be joining and discovering and become aware of their soul, even though, again, I need a lot of work and so on. But we go step by step and gradually we improve. So thank you for the compliment, but it's all of us who are doing everything. It's not just me. I'm just here as a host, presenting a few easy videos and trying to just promote the knowledge and the understanding a little bit more. So thank you.
I understand that. My point is the quality. And that's something that when it's a generic term that doesn't say whether it's good or bad quality. Quality is just a generic term. And my compliment to you is on the professional level of the quality of your presentation. And this is impressive. That's why I mention it. So, please don't be embarrassed by me saying that, because all of us are trying to do that. I'm trying to do that as well in these presentations. When I started out, it was all black and white. And the thing was that I was brought up in a school where they sold the sizzle and not the steak. And it's a very good sales technique, very effective. A lot of salesmen use that. In fact, we have all sorts of lobbyists crawling all over the capitals in Canada and the US, selling their wares. And the whole message behind the sizzle and the steak is that people are more prone to grasp a particular idea, concept, or product if they are excited about it. The problem with that excitement is that it's offset sometimes by the disappointment of the reality of the quality of the product that they get. So, well, I'm not going to go into too many examples, but the point is that I'm trying to make is, if you don't have a steak, sizzle is all you got. And the Kesh Foundation not only has sizzle, but it has the steak. And that's what we're doing here. So you, Mark, as a mature student, you spent thousands of hours learning about this technology, but there are new students all around. Yeah, but there's new students all around the world who haven't spent a split second with this. And so how do we bridge this? How do we bridge this gap? And so for the challenge that I see, shall I say, for myself, is to try and build this bridge, because Mr. Kesh can't wait for us. He's moving ahead at a rapid clip, and rightfully so. It's absolutely necessary because we've come to an existential crisis. So to build a bridge is kind of important because we need to get to that advanced stage. And I'm not just standing on a soapbox here, but what I'm saying is that there are ways and means for us to transcend to a faster knowing. And that is why this series on basic knowing is what I started with last week. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute on Plasma Science. The course is Basic Knowing. Today's subject is chemistry. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is September the 26th, 2021. This is a presentation of the Kesh Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. And I, looking at the schedule, want to show here that we started last October through the impetus of the Brazilian knowledge seekers. And all those who have been following the Friday night classes in Brazil and the teachings of Marie on Tuesday nights have seen the tremendous progress that has come about through the teamwork initiated, and teamwork extended to, from somewhere, and I don't know where, between 7,000 and 300,000 people. And this is amazing. And it's wonderful to see. And the product of this comes from just, basics, very, very basic. And they themselves have captured the understanding, and they're now making the connection through knowing. And that's what we've been trying to articulate through these classes. So why are we reviewing the physical basics when we're talking about the plasma science? So there's a very simple answer, and that has to do with sometimes if we don't get the sizzle, we don't see the steak and we don't enjoy the steak. So one of the ways to really enjoy something and appreciate it is by removing it, denying it. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, the saying says. But sometimes you don't know where you're going until you understand where you've been. And for many of us, because of the current educational system, we don't even know where we've been because we've been preoccupied with our own tiny little perfect world. And I was involved with that particular problem as well. And I, as a Canadian, thought I was fairly well educated, but I could not solve the problem with cancer in my family. And I struggled for 8 years to the point of physical and financial exhaustion. And a miracle happened. And within 8 weeks, that cancer was disappeared. And then I had a confrontation with myself, really, because I had to know about life. And I said, well, wait a second, I just want to know how to get rid of the cancer, and I want to get back, get my life back together and try and recoup some of the money that I lost. And that was only the sizzle. I had to learn about the steak. And then I had to review physics, chemistry, and these other subjects. And I thought I knew about these subjects. Well, I did, but I didn't know anything. In fact, it was embarrassing. And so it had to be, shall we say, educated.
If I could add
And
here, could I add something here, Alex? You brought up the steak and the sizzle, and they used to have these commercials on television between the hamburger companies, whose hamburger is bigger. And the catch line was, where's the beef? There's the bun, but there's no beef. So I equate the beef to the knowledge, and now we know where the knowledge is located. It's within the foundation and within the knowledge seekers of this foundation. So thank you for letting me say that.
That was really cool. A lot of people aren't aware of that. That just shows your age, Mark. It was one of the most successful advertising campaigns, and it actually used an old lady to make that exclamation, and that was the joke, actually. And it was extremely successful, and very few advertising campaigns have been as effective, except for what's going on today. So once we understand this basic knowledge, this physics knowledge, and how it relates to the plasma knowledge, then we have to understand how we can bridge ourselves to the broader knowledge. And do we need to go through those details, or can we just cross the bridge knowing confidently that the universe will provide? So in our basic teaching, obviously terminology was important. The fundamental points of plasma science, the magnetical gravitational field forces. This represents energy in motion. And as such, that energy has a charge. And this is all part and parcel of what we call natural plasma. So there is no other type. It is only natural plasma. And it is kind of interesting when we've been looking for these details in the middle of everything else. So in other words, you don't see the forest for the trees. You don't see, the ocean. You don't see the air. We're always looking for the little details. And one of the connections, of course, has been our nanostate, the monatomic structure, which gave us new geometries and new dimensions. And that created a new understanding of gradients, which allowed us to get into what we call dynamism. And today we're going to review Gantt state, because Gantt state is something that a lot of chemists think they understand. And Gantt state has to do a lot with emotions. And we find that emotions are kind of the connections to our soul. So if we are looking at Gantt as a chemical transaction, then something's missing. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So if we understand that better and we find out what we're missing, then that is pointing us to the direction that we need to go. And that's how you build dimensions. You see, you look at one point, then you look at another point and you connect, okay? And then when you make this connection, then you know how to get from here to there. So the here to there, we started with terminology, got us to understanding. Now we want to get from understanding to knowing, all right? And there are details, but these details are not necessarily the bridge to the knowledge. They're very helpful. It helps us in making connections. So the first connection that we have to understand is what is the difference between the physicality and the plasma science? Because there's a huge difference, and a lot of that has to do with the way energy is manifest. So in the physical state, which we refer to as the small m matter state, we can touch it and we can see it. So it's very physical. But in the plasma state, we can't touch it, we can't see it, but we can sense it. So because we couldn't see it, it was discounted by science. And it is now going to have to be accounted for because we can explain it. This is all part of the matter plasma. And the confusing thing is the way science was discovered, depending on what was discovered at what point in time, created a certain kind of understanding. And that actually, in many cases, created a misunderstanding. Okay, not to be confused with the Miss Universe contest. So when we look at manifestation and we define manifestation, we have a perception of what reality is. And so we've created a stacker unit, which gives us a way to understand this perception of reality better. Fundamentally, when two fields come together, they form another. So it's this formation of any field, which is the manifestation. It's the plasma feeding that leads to this manifestation. So this word feeding has come up already many, many times. And I hope that you can translate your hunger for feeding into a hunger for knowledge. You see, because this manifestation can be either non-tangible or tangible, non-visible or visible, plasmatic or physical. And so when you see the light, you have to know that there's a darkness behind it, which is supporting that. And that is the plasma reality. That plasma reality is a substructure that supports the physical reality. But there's no rule that says that it has to be the physical reality. Whichever reality it is a form artifact of the manifestation of two fields coming together. And the emotion of presence is one of them. And that is the form artifact of energy in motion. But when we look at energy in motion, we seem to relate very nicely to physicality. And when we talk about physicality, well, that is materialism, isn't it? So our materialism is the manifestation of physicality. And how physicality is materialized in physics is through nuclear decay. So that sounds kind of bad. You know, decay is bad, but nuclear decay is a normal reaction. It's just that the way we were taught, this nuclear decay would take 20,000 years. And so that was very terrifying. But we can now do that very rapidly. But that doesn't necessarily translate into, how shall we say it, good conduct. So we are looking at a gravitational transition of the reality. The gravitational is the reduction in energy level. Is coming together, and nothing can be more reductive than the pursuit of money, right? So it's not that the money is evil, it's the pursuit of money and the way we do it that is evil. And so the way to, shall we say, satisfy our consciousness or our conscious is to have a proxy. So that way we can have this reality manifestation by proxy so that we don't get our hands dirty. Either way, it's a pursuit of limitations. And that's what, unfortunately, a lot of the science is. So as a good detective, and we like to watch detective shows, don't we? Because detectives look for clues and they can solve a murder in less than an hour, which is pretty good considering we still haven't figured out how presidents get assassinated. But looking for clues, the purpose is to find evidence. And then we examine that evidence and then we make a hypothesis and we say, okay, here is what we see. And that limits your possibilities. But in actuality, it allows you to ask questions. So the first question you want to ask is why? And, you know, like there was a headline in the news this week that said the reason the murderer got caught was because he made a serious mistake. Well, I thought the serious mistake that he made was the murder. But anyway, why is not the question? Why is the answer? The murder was created. Why was it created? So there's some kind of evidence missing. And that lack of evidence is also the evidence. And so when we look at our Earth and we see how energy is moving around, we can't see this. All we can see is the evidence of the Earth, the evidence of our bodies, the evidence of our social interaction. When it's legally allowed. It has to do with repulsion and attraction, which we call the magnetico-gravitational relationship. And so energy is emitted and energy is absorbed. And the path that it follows is it has to come in, it has to go out, because energy is in motion, then it has to go around because it can't stop and it keeps on going. But if there's no reason for it to come in or go around, then it just carries on straight through. And for most people, that's an insignificant thing, right? That is advanced science and is, you know, beyond our, shall we say, pay grade. But our reality is between the ground and the magnetosphere. And whatever we give our time and attention to is what we call susceptibility. It's the giving of our time and attention, which is the magnetico-gravitational interaction. And we have to understand that now we have something else that is giving us evidence. So we find that in the universe, something is always something. We thought that, you know, the universe is full of nothing. Well, sorry, nothing is nothing. You can't have nothing. Something is always something as opposed to being something else. And when we created the GANTs and we saw the rotating fields, there must have been some kind of force that was not accounted for. And then when it made on the right-hand picture, and you see there's a hole, where did that hole come from? And then you look inside and there's nothing there. Wow. So we have to be better detectives. So in book number 1, we learned about the universal order, the creation of matter. And for a lot of us, we need to be extremely grateful for this book because we were born, and for many of us, we're going to go through to the end of our life and not know the answers to this. So all of us in the knowledge seekers community have this answer. You know this answer. Whether you acknowledge it or not is irrelevant. The point is, you've been told, you've been taught, and whether or not you absorb this knowledge and can act on it is up to you. Because now you know there's a connection, and that's what we're doing. We are connecting our understanding with our knowing, and we don't need to know the details unless we want to. But the structure of light is something that is very important because that has put a lot of limitations on us. In fact, the structure of light as we know it is physical. And that is the first clue. You have to know what is physical and what is plasmatic. And that's what these classes are all about. Because when you look at the origin of the universe, there has to be a way for the universe to participate the way life on this planet participates. There has to be a commonality. All right. And so if we understand how life works here, then we can understand how life works there. And it's very simple. Energy is abundant in the universe, and it's always in motion. That's how the universe was created. So it's when the energy comes together in a maggrav condition, which is what you see on the cover of book number 1, that is a combination of 3 energy fields. 3 energy fields with 3 different strengths. That's what identifies the energy field. The picture is very physical. It's like a pie. We're talking about food again. So we have matter state, dark matter, and antimatter. And the 3 come together and create a plasma field. And then when you have 2 fields and they interact, then you find there's an infinity loop. So we found one of the limitations of physics is the linear statistical application of the knowledge. How do we account for the curves? And so by going into the nanostate and beyond, we found that we introduced the curves of the universe. And then when we look in the universe, we see that, you know, nothing is kind of straight. And then, you know, when you go on the beach, you get a real clear indication of all the beautiful curves that we have on this planet. But some people think that curves are the way that we need to run our society, as in crooked. The principal matter that we have is the PM ticks, basics. They come together and create a force field interaction, basics. They create a force field in rotation, a maggrav condition, basics, basics of creation. Also, what is your point of view with respect to this? So all of us have an opportunity to capitalize on those 35 seconds that the average person gives to us when we're discussing plasma science. Plasma science deals with the attraction and repulsion of magnetical forces. And so there's a natural creation and there's a natural decay. This natural decay comes from the basis of the interaction of the attraction repulsion forces. So whether it's magnetic or gravitational is the residue beyond the creation of the substructure, which is the maggrav. So once you create the maggrav, you have the condition. From that condition, it is either magnetical or gravitational. Well, the fact of the matter is it's both, because life is a two-way street. So you have the maggrav, which is emitting energy, and you have the maggrav, which is absorbing energy, and it needs to emit and absorb to keep going. And from there, it interacts with everything else. And so from that sprouts the creation. And so you look at the model of creation and you say, well, where did these PM ticks come from? Well, look at this. So we see how the neutron breaks up into an electron-proton combination. But the byproduct is the release of the PM tick. And so the breakup of the neutron into the electron-proton atom is a process of nuclear decay, a natural process of nuclear decay. And then the difference is the release of these PM ticks, which go on to do other things. So we find that the ray motion is the creation. And so you have both. You have natural creation or you have natural decay. So that means we can transcend different energy states. How do we do that? Well, there is an energy transition zone, and that is what we call the knowing by connection. You understand the magnetical forces of the PM ticks, you understand the gravitational forces of the maggrav, the three basic dimensions that we have, the X, Y, and Z axis. And if you are viewing these three axes, then you know you're none of those three. So in terminology, we say the principal matter, the PM ticks are magnetical, and the convergence of the gravitational force fields are a maggrav. But where does this happen? So wherever that is, that's your environment, and that is your field interaction, which we call inertia. And so what happens is these energy packs that are traveling are coming from all different directions, but when they come together with a common denominator, they come together. You have your principal matter, which we call antimatter. You have your transition matter, which we call the dark matter. And then you have your convergence matter, which is the matter plasma. And all together is the conversion of energy into a plasma. And is it creation or is it decay? Well, as we said, there's a magnetical residue, and that from the maggrav condition, you can either converge energy or you can diverge energy. And there are independent variables that we have to take into account. So most of us haven't taken these things into account because we've only taken the most basic of basics into account. And what we have to understand is that the universe is interdependent. All the plasma fields are interacting with other plasma fields, all of them. So even, if you're the Holy King and you're crossing the street, your safety is dependent on your knowing how to get across the street. But it is also dependent on the morality of the people who are driving on that street, so that they know that they don't want to run you over, because there is always a mistake. It's natural, but there's also forgiveness. So the question is it willful, or is it skillful, or is it deceitful? So the cups of life have never been more important than they are now. They were brought on for the pandemic, but they're not the cups of pandemic. after 21 months, we need them more than ever because we still haven't had the payoff of the Corona dividend. There is a Corona dividend, and that is that it shows us what is not working. So if what is not working and the people who are paid to do the job are failing, then that is not where you look at it. So the absence of evidence is the evidence. And you as knowledge seekers have now the capability to take over the job, not only as detectives, but as universal functionaries. Make the cup of life. Zinc plate, copper coil, nano-coated copper coil, that's your kit. That's your kit. And you understand that there's a magnetical field and it creates a balance with a gravitational field. Now you have plasma energy. And then you have a second cup where you, instead of a zinc plate, you have a copper plate. Still you create a magnetical field. Still you bounce it off of the gravitational field. And there's a relationship between these two cups. One is emotional and one is physical. Even though they're both physical, but the relationship to each other have an emotional physical relationship, but the activity, the plasma interaction inside is the same. But if we're using this for a particular problem that is created as in the pandemic, keep the batches at least 1 meter apart, because there's an emotional context and a physical context, and we're talking about eradicating the virus. So how do we do that? Well, you look at the, shall we say, the common picture that the governments are showing, and you see that there's something interesting about this shape. And now as knowledge seekers, you understand what it means, and you can, shall we say, take it apart. And as knowledge seekers with plasma science, and we understand that that physical picture underscores the substructure, or shall we say, is a manifestation of the substructure. The substructure is the energy. And so the cup of life is to deplete that energy or convert that energy. One of the ways we convert that energy is to food. And so we do that in many different ways. And when we look at the two cups and they've done their job within, say, a few days, you look at the relationship and you find that the physical is the giver and the emotional is the taker, because the taker is the higher energy field. Oh, okay. So when the two work together, you find that it creates a Magdarev condition, and you balance that off with a gravitational point. Now you have somewhere for the soul to be anchored to. And as the new science is showing, do we take the magnetical gravitational foundation and bring in the soul, or we bring the soul to create the magnetical gravitational foundation? And then if we understand that better, then we understand that our relationship of the soul cups, the emotional cup and the physical cup, has to do with our environment. And our environment here is the earth. So we have a cup of inertia, and we see we have all nano-coated copper products in there, but the field reaction is the same. Magnetical field balanced off by the gravitational field. And then we have the cup of the earth. There's something that is anchoring us to this earth. So we changed one thing. We introduced now an iron coil, and we nano-coated that. And so we have a magnetical field and a gravitational field. Okay, so speaking of earth, well, wait a second. So, you know, we all like our little cups, right? Like our teacups and stuff like that. But now we have a cup of sweet. We have a cup of pressure. We have a cup of life. And these are ceramic cups. And ceramic cups, well, you know, that comes from the earth, doesn't it? But it's been infused with GANs. And so these are the cups, the ceramic cups that you see on our product list. And you as an archaeologist, if you're just looking at the physical artifact, it looks like another cup, but it doesn't tell you how civilized the civilization is. That's the difference. You have to know what the difference is. What is the difference between the atomic structure and the monatomic structure? It's still a physical structure, but the difference is, you know, you can think like a caterpillar or you can think like a butterfly. And that's the unchaining of man. So we see the interaction of all the cups that we have and how each cup has a magnetical gravitational field force. Each cup has a soul field force, and the collective of the 5 cups has a magnetical gravitational field force balanced off with a soul field in the center. And so these are the dimensions and the ranges on this planet. And so this is a good thing because we're a space organization. And so if we understand the rules, the plasma rules on this planet, then we can understand the plasma rules in space. And if we discount the physical rules on this planet, then we're in trouble. And so we just look at how can we transition our ranges, right? So we can go in the water, we can climb the mountains, and we can fly in the sky. Or we can go along the ground and go from one range to another range to another range and go around the world that way. And, you know, we can walk the walk or do the donkey walk, the car walk, or the plane walk. So whichever way we want to go. So last week we were revisiting physics and we see that we had many breakthroughs. And the key point was that these breakthroughs were like barriers. And the most important breakthrough after the sound barrier. So we know the sound barrier doesn't go as fast as the light barrier. So we broke the light barrier as well. But then there are magnetical barriers. And so we broke the Tesla barrier as well. And okay. And the point of the matter is, what you need to be able to determine if these are man-made. And the answer is, these were man-made. So, excuse me, I just gotta clean something up here. How about, okay. So we found that there are limitations with the physics. Well, what happens now? One of the limitations was the physics, was that we didn't understand chemistry, because what the chemistry does, it takes our understanding of physics and starts to balance them all together, kind of. So we now have, well, chemical limitations, which is our knowledge, right? So for a lot of you, you're not interested in chemistry, maybe, but you may be interested in cooking, or may be interested in running a restaurant. Today, that's a very precarious business, because in Canada, we don't know when we're going to be locked down again, and you need a passport to be able to go to a restaurant, certain kind of passport. But chemically, we know that we can change the color by changing the pH. In fact, that is a way for us to determine the pH of, oh, I see what's going on. And that is a way for us to determine the acidity or alkalinity of water or a chemical. And then we can, with our knowledge, design things. And one of the new chemicals, and I say new, we're going back to, shall we say,
I think I'm glad it's you scribbling on your own screen and no one else.
Well, I am going to be scribbling with an eraser. That's one of the things my mother told me, you know, she says,
Okay.
the erasers aren't big enough on the pens, on the pencils. As I always wore out the eraser before I wore out the pencil. So anyway, I've got the eraser ready. I'll just carry on. And the thing, what I want to bring up to date is a lot of people don't understand this, is the introduction of surfactants. And this was a major breakthrough in chemistry because it broke the surface tension of the water molecule. And I've been talking about the water molecule a lot in many of the classes because the water molecule is round. But with this introduction of a surfactant, it breaks that surface tension, and you can basically have one drop of water coat your entire desk, if you will, or your entire table. And that's what it does. So the surfactants release this. And this was a big deal because it allowed us to do a lot of things. One of the most exciting things in the beginning, of course, was for us to have fancy hairstyles, because fancy hairstyles wouldn't stay in place. But if you sprayed them with a hairspray, it would kind of solidify your hair into the style that you wanted. And one of the styles, of course, you may not remember, but you could look at the pictures, is spiky hair, you know. And how do you get those long spikes, you know, 5 and 6 inches, well, or even longer? And that's with hairspray, and that hairspray is made with surfactants. And you cannot believe how much of that chemical is used in our society. But then we have other physical alterations in chemistry, and they have basically to do with the oxidation reduction process. And so this is one of the things I'm referring to with respect to terminology, because it seems to indicate something to do with oxygen. Well, yes, it does. When pH seems to have something to do with hydrogen. Well, yes, it does. So there's a hydrogen-oxygen relationship, and that's affected by the pH. But to find something that is acidic, in other words, a low pH number, it releases hydrogen. Well, you know what? It also releases oxygen. And so that is the oxidation process. And then therefore, when it becomes alkaline, it binds the hydrogen. Well, it binds the oxygen as well. And so that's called a reduction. And so if you're taking and increasing, how come they call it reduction? Well, interestingly enough, when we talk about nuclear decay, and that is the same thing. It's coming down to a lower energy level. So in a way, this kind of confusing thing is making sense. But see, I was not a scientist. I was just an average Joe. And when I look at oxidation and reduction, I get confused. But now we were getting confused with magnetical gravitation as well. And then we were getting confused with positive and negative as well. Okay, so we had to sort it all out. And there were basic, shall we say, codes or rules, notations, understandings. And so once we sort it all out, then it becomes very easy. So the thing is, how do we define what is man-made and what is plasma-made? The eraser out again. Okay. Excuse me, I had to do something else. So we have introduced certain bars to our knowledge. Okay, so have they been done on purpose or otherwise? Well, I don't know. And that's not the point. But we have, it's interesting in our language, particularly the English language, when we refer to a bar, we know that those who tend the bar are bartenders. And so to be a good bartender, you have to have some chemistry knowledge. And then we have this phenomenon with these coffee shops. And to be a good preparer of different types of coffees, you have to be a barista. And of course, we know all about barristers, right? Barristers are lawyers. And for them to be lawyers, they have to be called to the bar, which is the British Attorney Registry. So we have bars for drinking, we have bars for lawyers, and you know what? We also have bars for prisoners. And then, of course, physically, we have parallel bars and uneven bars and high bars. And that's in athletics. And then in dancing, well, we have low bars, limbo bars. And that's kind of where most of us are. Are you in limbo? Where are we? So we have to find out what these bars are doing. And so bars kind of create barriers, really. So we found in the physics barrier, we had the speed of sound, the sound barrier. And so you wonder, was the Big Bang Theory was so loud that it broke the sound barrier? And we find that that's kind of a destructive science. And is that what happened? But we knew that there's a light barrier. So maybe, you know, we can go beyond the sound barrier with the Big Bang Theory. So maybe we have a chemical barrier. And when we reach that chemical barrier, then we have an explosion. Well, maybe that's the Big Bang Theory. But, you know, we find sometimes that the explosions are so loud that they broke the factory. It's another kind of destructive science. So we have this chemical creation, and they say, well, it came from the Big Bang Theory. Well, I think we need to put that theory to rest, because, you know, when we look at how we create things, we have a problem. And one of the problems is our lack of understanding, our lack of education. And so I'm highly critical of kind of the Canadian way of life. And the thing is, because we have this knowledge all around us, and we're not too interested in this knowledge. So we're preoccupied with six packs. When we think about six packs, maybe we're thinking about our abs that we build up in the gym. Or maybe we think about the number of bullets in a gun. But most of us are thinking about our beer, because it is the weekend and the American football is on, and we have tailgate parties, and you have 4 6-packs make a case of 2-4. And so in Canada, it's another 2-4 weekend. And I am Canadian. And of course, being Canadian is a advertising campaign for a beer company. But another Canadian thing is what we call Newfie Screech. And that is not a derogatory term. If you've ever had Newfie Screech, my God, it'll put hair on your chest. Another kind of Newfie Screech, of course, is a barrel wash, which, so these, we're talking about alcohol, right? But when I talk about a barrel wash, basically you take alcohol that's made in a barrel, and once the alcohol is bottled, then the barrel is then discarded. Well, to make Newfie Screech, you wash the barrel. And then you wonder, if the Big Bang Theory is not working, maybe we have a chemical answer to creation, the primordial swill, the chemical soup, if you will. So we find that we have chemical plants. We call them factories. In these chemical plants, we create chemicals. In the process of creating these chemicals, we create pollution. It begs the question, is the chemicals we create also pollution? And we're creating global warming. And We call that a pollution. We need to clean up this planet. So maybe we can create a global cleanup. So we have natural plants which facilitate this cleanup. But that's beyond today's subject because we're talking about chemical plants. So next week, we'll talk about natural plants. Because we're at a watershed, you see. We're at a watershed to identify what is physical reality and what is plasma reality. And we need to have the skill to discern that, okay? Because if we don't have the details, then we have to have the knowledge. We have to have the knowing. And where does that knowing come in? So when we look at last week, we found out that the physical is on one side of the watershed, okay? And it's not on the other side of the watershed. So what is a watershed? Well, the watershed is the point at the top of the mountain on which the water begins flowing. And so we have ice on the top of the mountain, and the ice melts into water and it flows down the mountain. On which side of the mountain does it flow? And that's the watershed. And as this water flows and melts into the ice melts into water and flows down the mountain with the rivers into the seas, into the oceans. And so the vast majority of the surface of this planet is covered with water. And then that water evaporates into gas. So we have the three basic states in physicality: the gas, the liquid, and the solid. And the whole thing about physics and the whole thing about chemistry is that we have to learn that there are changes in these states and the causes of these changes. So one of the causes, of course, is fire. And we use that to nanocoat our wires. We also use that to heat a lot of chemicals. Sometimes mixing chemicals generates heat. And depending on which chemicals we mix affects the pH, which is the potentiation of hydrogen. So when we release hydrogen, we also release oxygen, and that is the oxidation process. But something happens which causes a change in the chemical substrate. Now, on the other hand, when we emulsify something, that means we're on the alkaline state. And so we have the oxidation, which is magnetical, and we have the reduction, which is gravitational. And so for short, we call this the ox-redox reaction. And so chemically speaking, to identify things, we have a reaction. Well, to facilitate the reaction, we have to have a reagent. So a reagent is something that you add to the chemical process to help you identify it. So they are additive, right? And they show you the reaction. And then based on that reaction, like, when we take a test to determine if, we have the virus, so then we have to run through some chemistry. And we figure out whether or not we have the virus. So one of the ways that we're doing with old chemistry is we blend things. But with the surfactant chemistry, we are actually cooking things. And so these are the old chemistries and the new chemistries, but you know what? They're still physical. And so when we look at the plasma science and we put our stacker unit together, we found that we had the physicality of the 5 cups of life, and we stacked them together and we created a stacker feeding where the higher feeds the lower, okay? But that's higher feeding to the lower feeding is not visible and it's not tangible. So we know that the stacker units are physical, but the energy transfer is not physical. So we as knowledge seekers, we have figured this out. Well, in chemistry, there's another kind of stacking, and that has to do with interstitial stacking. Okay, so as I said, it's a May 2-4 weekend, and we don't want to get too technical here. because we're all getting kind of thirsty, especially with all the food we're talking about. So we're looking for some kind of thirst quenching. And, you know, that's the same thing. When you put out a fire, you quench the fire, right? But also you can quench your knowledge. You have a thirst for knowledge, you can quench that. Or you have a chemical reaction and you are missing some chemical constructs, which are literally physics constructs. And so you're quenching that need. You have to understand that there's a sequence. You have to go through a sequence. If you're not in sequence, well, then you're out of sequence. And every bartender understands this sequence, because one of the drinks that we have with alcohol, it's called a shooter. And what is a shooter? And that is a drink which has different alcohols that are mixed together, but they form layers. And each of these layers has a different density. So the higher density goes to the bottom, right? And so each alcohol has a different density, and a good bartender will have this chemical knowledge. So this is where bartenders learn this in the school of bartending. And this shooter shows you that there is sequencing. So if you don't want to learn about sequencing, then down the hatch. But otherwise, you have to understand the sequencing, because that's what we used to eliminate cancer in my family. We had a chromated substance, which is the technical term for a shooter. A shooter is a chromated substance that has a sequencing by density. And this understanding of density, of course, extends to the industry of alcohol. And so there's alcohol and there's water. And if you mix the two, 1 + 1 = 1.8. What? Well, something's wrong here. How is that possible? And so quite literally, if you add the water to the alcohol, which every good businessman knows, right? If you want to make something more of, one of the best ways to do that is to dilute it, right? So that way it looks like it's more. That's why we have crackers, right? It's the same weight, but it's puffy. So it looks like it's more. So you're not getting more, it's just puffier. And so that's what they do with the alcohol. But if you change the sequence and add the alcohol to the water, then you find that the alcohol sits interstitially between the water molecules, because there's a gap and the alcohol finds it. And so 1 + 1 = 1.8. And so if they want to increase, that's why you always find when they make a drink, they always put the alcohol in first. Because if they do it the other way, you'll get less. This way you get more. So they put the alcohol in, then they add the water, and then 1 + 1 = 2. So where do we know about these gaps? Well, we learned about nano gaps, right? Because when we learned about nanostate, we found that they were chained like atoms, but they were unchained. So they acted like atoms, in other words, linking together, but not chained. And so the chaining action is the gap in between the nanoparticles. So they were monatomic particles and they had a gap. And so we find that there are layers in between, right? And so in between these layers is what you call the interstitial layering. That's not what's going on in the nanostate. I'm just talking about what's going on when you mix alcohol and water. But in the nanostate, not only do we have layers in between, but then we still have more gaps. And so that's the difference. So there's still more. There's still more gaps. And that's why the nanostate is of a higher energy state. So now you know the difference. So when we look at the periodic table of elements, and in our society, we like to look at what is the lowest common denominator, right? Because we want to make things very simple. But really, you don't want the lowest common denominator, you want the common denominator. Because if you only went by the lowest common denominator, then that's all you would have. You would never have Earth, right? Because you would all be going for the lowest common denominator. So the Earth is a common denominator. The sun is a common denominator. You are a common denominator. Instead of looking for the lowest common denominator, maybe we should be looking for the highest common denominator. The problem with the periodic table of elements is they're elementary. So they are the lowest common denominator of the nuclear decay. You're getting into elements. So when you break everything down into its elementary component, you've come down to the lowest energy state, right? So this is why we get into these higher energy states. So this is why we progress from physics to chemistry. And then simply when you look at alkalinity, and we have a physical way to change alkalinity of water. And one of those ways is with electrolysis. So with electrolysis, we're creating both alkaline and acidic water. Well, we can also do that chemically by adding a chemical. We can add an acidic chemical like pH down, drops the pH of the water. Or we can put in an alkaline chemical, which we call pH up, and increase the alkalinity. Okay, so we have physical and chemical altering. Well, we also have plasma altering. In the plasma science, we can create plasma alkalinity in our plasma water. Why? Because the plasma science is true to the soul, and the soul wants to be alive and healthy. And in order to be that, we, as our water within our body, have to be slightly alkaline. And so the plasma does that without physicality, without chemistry. Okay, so when we look at our fatty acids and we say, oh, you know what? We have around our fatty acids, we have a phospholipid bilayer, which we know that was created right from the fatty acids were created from amino acids, right? And they combined together in a hydrophilic head, and they had hydrophobic tails. And then we also have alpha-linolenic acid, which again is slightly alkaline. Okay, but when we examine these things, we look at this chemical breakdown. Yeah, carbon, there's hydrogen, there's oxygen, there's links, and then there's a water soluble, and then there's an oil soluble side. Yeah, now we understand how fatty acids work, don't we? So the thing about it, we said one of the sciences in chemistry is emulsion. So we know that oil and water don't mix, and that's a good thing, because otherwise we'd all be bags of mush. But you know, when we get too fat, then one of the things that we want to do is called liposuction, where we literally suck the fat out of us physically. Well, we didn't create the fat physically. The fat is a physical manifestation of some kind of reaction, which was a chemical manifestation of something. And so we can create fat, but you know what? We can also emulsify fat, and that is done at a high pH. And so maybe now we get a little bit of an insight, what we call caustic chemistry, because caustic is an extremely high pH, and that's literally what it does. So if you were to take water, which normally is at the pH of 7, below 7 is a pH of, is acidic, and above 7 is alkaline, and each level from 7 to 8 is an order of magnitude. And the drinking water range is like, you know, between, shall we say, 6 and 8, around that area. What's 11.5? Well, that emulsifies oil. And then the highest pH is 14. And now you're getting to the caustic territory. So now you understand a little bit chemically what's going on with sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide, which we tend to blend basically a 4-to-1, very basic. And we use that for nanocoating copper coils. Oh, okay. So now we understand the difference between the regular science and the plasma science and what we're doing. We're changing a state here using chemistry, but we're doing something else, you see, because when we understand chemistry, and probably one of the things a lot of people don't like about chemistry is the chemical formulas. But like we found with the speed of light, where E equals C, the speed of light equals, no, I was right the first time. E equals mc squared, mass times the speed of light squared. That's the energy. So there's a balance. There's a left side equals the right side, right? And physics is elementary. Chemistry is the combination of these elements, right? So in physics, we call those molecules, but in chemistry, we call it solutions. So this initial connotation of the word solution means liquids, but hopefully we can have some solutions to problems too. So let's look at the chemistry, and we talked about carbon dioxide, right? So we have carbon, we have oxygen, and so we take carbon and we add water, and it makes CO2. Well, does the left side balance the right side? So we only have one oxygen in the H2O, but we have two oxygens in the CO2. And interestingly enough, oxygen always comes in pairs. So knowing that little tiny thing makes everything crystal clear. Okay, so we have to balance off the oxygen. So it's not one H2O, it's two H2O. Oh, now we have the two oxygens. Okay, well, if we have two oxygens, so we have two hydrogens twice, that's 4. Okay, so now we've balanced off the equation. Okay, so there you understand chemistry as a math equation. Okay, very simple. I just want to be very simple because this is basics. And then we look at zinc oxide, right? We take zinc and oxygen and we form zinc oxide. That's, that's your chemical equation. But oxygen comes in pairs. Wait a second. So we have to have 2. Okay, so we have now 2 water molecules on the left side. So what does that mean? Well, one of the oxygen goes with the zinc, and one of the oxygens goes with the H2. Oh, okay, well, this is good. So we have 2 hydrogens left over. I wonder where they go. Well, it doesn't matter. We're just talking about chemistry as math, okay? So this equation is balanced, all right? Well, let's look at what happens in copper oxide. So now we're going to use copper and oxygen. We have CuO. Oxygen comes in pairs. Okay, so same thing. Copper plus 2 water molecules equals the copper oxide plus water. And then you have another 2 hydrogens. Okay, so that balances out. That's chemistry as math. How many times have people looked at GANs and they looked at it as chemistry? Here's your equation. You want to make CO2? You take copper, nanocoated copper, right? Plus zinc, plus water, plus salt, and you get CO2 GANs. Try and balance that mathematically. How about zinc oxide? You have a nanocoated zinc plus a non-nanocoated zinc plus water plus salt, and you get carbon dioxide. Well, what happens with copper oxide? Well, you have a nanocoated copper plus a copper plus water plus salt, and you get CO2. That's wrong. You don't get that. What do you get? That is wrong. Did you see that? Just a little bit of knowledge and you know what's right. Okay. You get, oh, still wrong. How's that? Better? This is chemistry as plasma science, okay? So this is the difference. You have to look at, there's something that's missing. So when you look at the stacker units and how you make the stacker units, and you see all these elements in there, and together you take each of these cups and then you put them together in a stacker unit. So you combine them all together in the 5-cup vertical system. Okay, well, we have a new cup called the cup of the universe. So when you look at all these things in there, and then we wanted to do last week, we did a physical inventory, right? So we had copper, we had zinc, we had iron, and we had composite called galvanized. And we had plates, and we had coils, and some were bare, and some were nano-coated. And that's our physical inventory. Great. Now we have a chemical inventory. We had to add salt water. What is salt water? Well, it's sodium and chlorine. All right. And then we have water. What is water? Well, it's hydrogen and oxygen. So what do we have? We have sodium, we have chlorine, we have hydrogen, we have oxygen. And what do we produce? We produce salt and water. And the oxygen comes in pairs, right? So to balance off this equation, we would say sodium plus chloride is your salt. And you have 4 hydrogens and 2 oxygens, right? And so you have 2 H2O. And that's chemistry as math. And so you add that to your inventory, right? So now you got your physical inventory and you have your chemical inventory. And then just to, round out the picture, we can have also a potassium salt, a magnesium salt, and a calcium salt. And we'll talk about that more. This is your chemical inventory. So when you look at the periodic table of elements, the point is that they're elementary and that life is more complex. So the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. The sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. So you either knowing the details or you need to have the details of knowing. So when you look at the periodic table of elements, you see patterns. And fortunately, in simple terms, each of these elements is in straight arithmetic sequence based on the number of protons. And so that's why hydrogen has 1. And then they all go up to over 100. Well, we did a little change of pace here. We moved the left side over to the right side because we wanted to get on both sides of the inert gases, right? And then when you look at it in more detail, you see that these are all the elements. We have the inert gases in the dark blue. And so on the left side, we have our famous amino acid, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. And we also have our copper and zinc. And now we've added our iron. And then on the right side, we have hydrogen. Oh, well, if I was on the left side, just a minute. Okay, so then hydrogen's on the right side, and we have sodium and magnesium and potassium and calcium. Okay, so we've got all our kits together. So just like in music, we know all the notes and we know the names and we know our scales, but what's missing? And it's the player. It's the music that's missing. Okay, when we have our basics, then we know how to play the music. Well, how do we know that? So, and that's the difference. We are plasma beings, okay? So we are the higher energy state, and everything else that we're looking at is in a lower energy state. And as soon as we realize that, then the sooner we'll understand the cup of the universe, okay? Because the cup of the universe is basically a physical manifestation of our representation, right? So when we're looking at what are we trying to do on this planet, we're looking for creature comforts. And so our creature comforts help us with our mental state. And so that's where we get our ideas from, a healthy ideas in a healthy mental state. But then we also have a healthy emotional state where we get our wishes fulfilled. And this is where our courage stems from. And of course, we all need love. And love is ubiquitous in the universe if we know how to work with it. So when we look in space and we say there's nothing there, energy is all over the place and it's always in motion. And so this is the plasma fuel that is running this universe. And every time there's a reaction, whether it's a physical reaction or a chemical reaction, there is an energy transaction. So the plasma is the transaction currency that we have to understand, that when we're looking at a plasma interaction, all things are working in combination. So that's why there is an infinity loop. That's why there are curves. So there's a magnetical giving, and there's a gravitational taking, there's a magnetical pushing, and there's a gravitational pulling. But there's a pushing and pulling to balance off all. And the balance point is the Magravity condition. And the movement of the Magravity condition is the residue. So when we're looking at our chemical understanding of what's going on in the cups of life, and we see we brought the kit, but what we got was copper GaNs, zinc GaNs, CO2 GaNs, calcium carbonate GaNs, amino acid, and water. And we got that in a little tiny cup for the price of less than $10. Free education. And then where were the limitations? And then we find, well, the limitations were actually physical, you see, because when we looked at the mass of the neutron, we found that it was missing something. We found that you take the proton mass and the electron mass, plus the mass of the PM ticks, and plus the total mass of the antimatter, matter, and dark matter. This is the totality of everything that is going on, trying to achieve some kind of energy level balancing and positioning. And this is all the totality. We have to look at the big picture. How big is the big picture? It's a really big picture, okay? That little tiny red dot in the bottom right-hand corner, that's our little tiny perfect world, okay? So we didn't create this big picture from some big bang, all right? It was created from scientific knowledge of the laws of the universe. So, well, let's have some food for thought, because we've been talking a lot about food, right? Food science is chemistry, really, because you have to know what the difference is. We're talking about the difference between physics and plasma. So you have to also understand the difference between a short order cook and a gourmet chef. And the difference is about $180,000 per year in salary. You see, a cook, both cook with fire, but one of them gives you heartburn, right? Both try really hard to give you emotional and physical satisfaction. So we're not talking about nutrition here. We're talking about comfort food, right? And isn't it interesting that food is governed by the Food and Drug Administration? So what does that mean? That means food is a drug. So the food, yeah, it's comfort, right? It's comfort for us. So Timothy Leary had a food and he gave you orally, and that was LSD. For some people, that was not enough. They had to have an injection, which we called mainlining, right? So you inject the chemicals into you. Why? Because you were getting a different kind of creature comfort, and that was done through mind altering. So you have mind altering orally and by injection. Okay, but the question is, what's the difference? Is it injection by a needle or by a bullet? And then what's the difference if we have an injection through estrogen-enriched compounds that we eat? All of these are physical and or chemical alterations, right? But what happens, like we found with our alkaline plasma water, what happens if we have a plasma feeding? When we take the cups of life, the 5 cups of life in the stacker, or what happens if we take the universal cup, right? And we use that as a feeding station, a plasma feeding station, isn't it? Because the plasma is a substructure for a physicality. The food as a physicality is actually an energy feeding system. And so we're involved in the physical activity of eating. We're involved in a chemical process of digesting, but what we're looking for is a plasma feeding. So we're at a watershed here, you see, because there's a missing ingredient. And the question really becomes, is this missing ingredient a moral issue, or is it a chemical ingredient that we're missing? Is it a plasmatic thing that we're missing, or is it a physical? And then we find that as things evaporate, we find that gases do some funny things. And physics and chemistry can't explain it. And so therefore, these subjects are out of range. What range are we talking about? We're talking about the watershed. How do you know the difference? And so we find that which side does the water come down? And you find that the physical knowledge and the chemical knowledge comes down on one side, on the physical side. So we are not on that side because we are plasma beings. So this is nice to know, but you need to know on which side of the range you are on. And when we look at things on Earth, we look at it from the earthbound perspective. Well, let's change our point of view and look at it from the plasma perspective. We are dynamic plasma beings, and we have a soul, and then we have a physical state, and that is also governed by a soul. We call the soul of the body, which allows us to go to sleep. And when these things work together, we get a physical and emotional satisfaction, and we can operate on this planet. And this planet today is our environment, but the rest of the universe is waiting for us to learn these lessons. So when we define plasma, when you get those 35 seconds from someone who doesn't know what you're talking about, tell them plasma is a kind of energy state. And this is transcending the limitations of science. And it's very important. So when we did the basic teaching and the basic understanding, that was trying to allow us to open up to the knowledge. But there's knowledge and there's knowing. And so we've been talking about basic knowing. And because of this, it allows us to bridge this gap. And it's very important for us to bridge this gap at a higher order of magnitude, because for a lot of us, we don't have time. How much time? How much time is 399 knowledge seekers workshops in a row every Thursday, divided by 52? And tell me you're not impressed. Next week will be a milestone. That'll be a milestone for the Keshe Foundation. It might be a millstone, though. It might be a millstone for the rest of the population not prepared to invest the time and energy required to know. So we have to bridge this gap, you see, because there are energy bindings on this planet we are self-serving, that's important, but we're self-serving at the expense of others. And we do this through deceit. And so we find that things like booze and drugs and food and injections and even therapies that we're using plasma science as a therapy. Why? Because all of these things allow us to abdicate our responsibilities. You cannot have knowing and knowledge without bearing responsibility. So there is no passing of the buck here. You know, we talk about legalizing drugs and alcohol and legalizing foods even, although there are many foods that we have in our food chain that are not legal. Oh, because they changed the name. And then we're legalizing plants. What could be more natural than plants? So what are we doing? We're legalizing nature. And then we're legalizing different kinds of injections. And then one of the things we're doing with our responsibility is we're legalizing our liabilities. In fact, we are legalizing our non-liability. This is the difference between use and abuse, okay? So we've seen physical and chemical explosions, and we've heard the big bangs. And this is all the weaponization of our knowledge of chemistry and physics. And do you call that skillful use, or do you call that social abuse? So when you're looking for that missing ingredient is morality. And what that does is it teaches you that the cross you double cross is your eternal burden, because it consumes energy. You see, life wants to live, and life is providing for life. And so the ethics of the universe involves morality, compassion, and courage, because this is the essence of creation. And when you have those coming together, then you have genuine creation without the burden. And when we bring out the universal body enhancement spaceship units, this is the plasma-bound science, unlimited. You have horizontal enhancement. This is the restoration of your emotional and physical vitality. And we've seen them operate in the Linz exhibit, where we see the connection between the source of our existence and our physicality. And we understand that we can enhance our bodies, and then we can also enhance our physicality. Magnetical, gravitational interaction between the source and our soul. There's no getting back to nature. We are nature. That's what the Universal Cup is trying to show us. And that's what we need to learn. We need to learn that we are in the physical destination state, and the energy is coming to us from a dynamic transfer state. And so when we look at the Universal Cup, we need to see the energy, forget the physicality, see how things interact. So we know we have the kit, we have the components, but you know, energy is always in motion. And that's why they say what goes around comes around. So either we link up the peace dome, or we conquer through division. Well, the Universal Council is operating on the universal laws, and no man-made law can usurp the universal law. So when we look at the context, it doesn't matter the environment. It's a universal law, and the universal community is waiting. This is the soul food that we need, so that we can tune into the rest of the universe, turn on to the energy that it gives us, and drop out of our physicality and understand that the soul needs to receive. You provide that pattern for your soul, and you will get the energy for your soul and the benefits for you, your family, your community, this earth, and this universe. And so when we look at the basic components, we are the basic components, because we're just the messengers of peace and friendship. But there's an independent variable. And so when we look at North America and the patriots that we have here, understand that you can't be a patriot in one country and not be a patriot in another country, because all countries have patriots. So what is the independent variable? The universal language of knowing is being a universal patriot. And the way we do that is by knowing this is Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science, which we put in the public domain. And we ask people to sign the World Peace Treaty and benefit, because they will find the truth. The question is, will truth seekers become difference makers? As we deliver the plasma science, it needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this type of class, and I hope I've given you lots of food for thought. Over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you again, Alex, for expanding our horizons. While we're waiting for questions to come in, and I'm sure you're warming up your coffee, if I could tell a little funny I heard this week, a little joke. Fella walks into his local healthcare establishment and to get what everybody's encouraged to get these days. And while the nurse is preparing the concoction to be administered, he says, "Nurse, does this provide any kind of immunity?" And she says, "Yes," to the manufacturer. Now, moving on, wondering if we have anyone new here today who is this the first, if this is the first time you're joining us, we just have a tradition where we ask you to open your mic and tell us who you are and where you're from. Is there anyone here for the first time that hasn't joined us before? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself or how you came across this meeting. I think most have been here in the past. One of the questions that I had, Alex, is when we say CuO, you said oxygen comes in pairs. Is the correct pronunciation, is it CuO2? And would that possibly apply to zinc as well, ZnO2 rather than ZnO?
Well, Mark, you're back into the details, aren't you?
Sorry.
No,
Okay.
I mean, this is a very good question, you see.
We could pass on that. I could give you another one. Why
No,
do
but-
we? Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
I
go
have
ahead.
a question too.
Okay, wait in line just a moment. A second question, if you didn't like that first one, was why do we call some things like CO2 a GANS, but we call zinc an oxide? Is it still a GANS? Or copper oxide, is it still a GANS? Because we do refer to them as GANSes, but why is the oxide in there?
So, Mark, the reason I brought this class up is because of these questions, you see. We are not dealing with a totally uneducated population. A large percentage are highly educated. So these questions always come up because you're always going to rely on your education, aren't you? You're going to try and find some kind of common denominator. When we're talking about GANS, we're talking about something completely different. First of all, we do not have a plasma periodic table. And I don't want to call it a periodic table of elements, because when you see the GANS, none of them are elements as we know it. Elements are elementary. So we have zinc, we have copper, we have hydrogen. But when you put them all together, people tend to think about chemistry. But if you put all these things together, well, go in your backyard and tell me, you know, if you can put your rose bush together, or, you know, even your grass or your dandelions. You know what I'm saying? So we're not answering those questions with physics and chemistry. So the way it was referred in what we know is as an oxide, a zinc oxide or a copper oxide and then carbon dioxide. But it's GANs. So we need a new type of notation. And Mr. Kesh, with the cup of the universe, was introducing a new type of notation. So anytime you're introducing something new in science, there has to be an acceptance by the scientific community. One of the problems with the scientific community is it limits our knowledge because it has to be verified and validated through physical means. Well, we can validate that we can create GANs in our cup of life, but science has been loath to try and explain that with the physical science. It's having a little bit more success with the chemical science, but you know, all you're doing is you've got this primordial swill, which doesn't really explain creation. But if you understand the plasma science with respect to the magnetical and gravitational giving and taking, then you know that the components in the cup were not the components that created the GANs. The components inside the cup created the environment. The GANs came from the air. Everything on this planet came from the air, the COHN, the amino acids came from the air. These are all gases. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen are gases. They came from the air and they manifested it into physicality. No one in physics or chemistry has explained it that way, but the Kesh Foundation has. And if you understand how energy is giving and taking, and how we go through natural decay and through natural creation, then we can understand what this GANs is. There is no doubt in my mind that we have all produced GANs before we came to the Kesh Foundation. And we probably threw it away because it was dirt. It was garbage. It wasn't what we wanted. What do we know what we want? Because if we want it so badly, why are things run so badly? Why, after all these years, you know, do we have to fight for peace? That doesn't make sense, because fighting is war. So you can't have peace and war at the same time. Doesn't compute. So it isn't the war that we're after. It isn't the peace that we're after. It's the harmony that we're after. The harmony with the universe. And if we, as knowledge seekers, gain enough knowledge to go into space, we will be engaging with other knowledge seekers on this universe who we are not aware of, because they're not necessarily operating in our dimension. So if we want to transcend into that dimension, the ticket is through the morality. So, you know, there was a question, is it important? Is it fundamental for the plasma to work? Can the plasma work without morality? On this planet? Yes. In outer space? No. And so we have the difference between our little tiny perfect world and the rest of the universe. And if we want to break out of this prison, we take the bars off, the limitations. And not only will that allow us to travel the span of the universe, but it's the freedom and emancipation of humanity, which the universal community is most anxious to invite back in. We need to understand that. So we have choices. We need to take the limitations off. We need to know what the difference is. So with your question is directly targeted towards the physical manifestation. So, and I thank you for that, because you're clearly demonstrating what we've been trying to do is create a bridge of knowing into the plasma science. So we have to create that, because physically it doesn't exist at this point in time. Thanks, Mark. That was a terrific question.
Okay, thank you. Someone else wanted to come in here. Who had
Yeah,
their, oh,
me.
yes, Selena, thank you.
Yeah. After hearing everything, can I conclude that saying that relax and breathe? Can I, Alex?
Relax and breathe, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, when you say relax, have trust, is that what you're saying?
And breathe. And breathe. Yes. Yes.
Well, certainly, because your soul follows your breath.
Are you saying this as a metaphor, or you're asking Alex to relax and breathe?
No. He's teaching us everything. So after teaching, there is a conclusion. So I find out the conclusion. I told him that is right or not wrong.
No, definitely you're right. But I brought up the schedule here, and you see there are different sciences. So we as individuals can't possibly know about all these sciences, because there's two things there. One is that there's so many, and two, they are partitioned off. Each science has its own limitation, and they try and stay within that group. The plasma science is teaching us that we can transcend all of these individual subjects. So on this planet, we are using breathing as a fundamental way of our existence. But when we look at our physicality as a total package, so we have lungs where we can breathe, but our total package consists of cells. And the way these cells exchange energy, which is the movement of hydrogen in a positive or negative direction, then we call that cell respiration. So the cells need to breathe, but the way they breathe is different from the physical construct, the way you and I understand that. So one of the things that helps in meditation is actually deep breathing, because it allows us to expand. It allows us to relax. It allows us to
Alkaline.
The alkalinity is a byproduct of the healthy environment.
Yeah.
So if you have good thoughts, you can create a good environment. And if you have a good environment, then you will have harmony. We all need to do that. But do we know that we need to do that? Okay. We need to do that. Or do we just, allow the politicians to do, or do we allow the scientists to do that? And then do we allow the advertising agencies, the what do you call the propaganda machines, or the lobbyists to dictate? Do we go for the sizzle, or do we go for the steak? If you don't have the steak, then you've got to have the sizzle. But I'll tell you what, if you go to a restaurant and you get the sizzle and you buy the sizzle and you leave hungry, you know the difference. You're not going back to that restaurant again. And that's what we need to do. We need to discriminate and to go for what is worth and stop chasing what is worth less. So I hope I'm answering your question that way.
We are looking wrong places.
Yes, that's right. That's right. We are part of the universe. We are in the universe, and we are universal beings. Hello.
Yes. Thank you.
And
Thank you for your great question.
I was going to ask Keaton, he was here, but it looks like he's not in the list now. If he got a hold of the presentation Mr. Kesh made in the Beyond Books, I think it was, conference in Athens, but he has gone. But Mr. Kesh also mentioned about orphanages and the success they were having in the orphanages. And it made me think of Patricia. I think she's here. Yes, she is. I was just wondering, Patricia, how you did with the video you made as far as getting releases or forwarding that video to the foundation for review so that we could all see what you were doing there or what has happened.
I sent the video, but I still have to get the authorization for them to release responsibility or whatever.
Yes, the talent release. Okay, okay, very good. But yes, Mr. Kesh went into
I'll
some.
get that next week. I'll get that next week, and then we'll be able to watch it.
Okay, and you're going to forward that to Rick, I think?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Because Mr. Kesh did go into some detail there in the Athens conference about the successes they were having, and these young people were that were brain damaged and things, they're becoming quite self-aware of themselves. I know he indicated the disposable diapers or the Pampers and things were going down, but they were also wanting to fit in with the community more. They're becoming more self-aware. Even some of the beds, I think, were empty now. But I'd have to review it again to be sure. It was probably 3 in the morning when I was watching that. But a very nice presentation, and I think we can take this to many, many different places like that. Same situation, people had to abandon their children or for whatever reasons they couldn't take care of them, and they ended up in these places like what Patricia had gone and elevated many there from her report. Anything else, Patricia, you wanted to add?
You know what I think is that they're really in such a lack of love because they come from such horrible environment, and then where they feel taken in by someone that loves them. For example, there were these sons, and if they give them love and they take them out of that terrible environment where they were growing, that already elevates them a lot. And then having someone give them a chance to be a better person in the future. And I think each one of us could go into, there's orphanages everywhere, there's elder homes everywhere, and then everybody's just in the lack for love. And I think it's just holding someone's hand and touching someone's shoulder, it makes a big difference for all these people. And then I was one of my friends is the head of the children with cancer. So with them, maybe that she could like spray a cup of one in the building, a new building, which one of my other organizations helped build. So I'm sure I could get in there with plasma water, cup one, and then maybe change the life of these children that are at the end stage. And that's why they built that building, so they get their.
You're sort of fading, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your beautiful work, and that inspires the rest of us to replicate.
Pardon?
We're losing your voice, Patricia. You must be driving or moving. We seem to be losing the signal.
getting a bad signal. I'm driving.
Okay, I just wanted to thank you for inspiring all of us. And again, the older homes or the nursing homes, what they call here, have many people in there whose parents, sometimes children put their parents in there. And again, they don't visit them that often. They feel abandoned and lonely. I think her idea of love and that you're valuable and just touching the hand, as Mr. Kesh did with the woman who wanted to get pregnant. She needed to feel love. She needed to feel that she was worth, you know, and appreciated. And I think this has a lot to do. We can do that through the fields, through our souls and through our physical being there. So thank you.
There's a lot of things that we can do that are free. I mean, just a smile, just a look into the eyes of someone that needs love, and then you just transmit that love.
We agree. And so many people are want recognition, and they're starving for recognition. No one will acknowledge them that much, and just that recognition and that touch and that caring sense, they can feel that right through the fields. I'm pretty sure they can do that. And that's a beautiful work you're doing, because there's so many that feel they've been abandoned and they don't have anyone left, and that doesn't make a good condition for living positively, let's say. Would someone else like to present a question or make a comment?
Can I just interject one moment?
Oh,
Mark,
please.
Well, I want to thank Patricia, along with Alenka and Antonio and John, for translating in the Spanish community. I want to thank Liliana and Victor for organizing the team. And I think you're going to find great things happening from the Hispanic community, because we have a terrific group, terrific foundation. And we have the terrific Brazilian and Italian group that are demonstrating what is possible. And I think we're going to see very rapid, how shall we say it, good things happening.
Growth, yes.
So I want to thank these people very much, because the dedication is paramount to our success.
And who's the gentleman that comes in besides John? I can't think of his name right this second. Not Antonio. It starts with an A, I think. He comes in and does some. Go ahead.
In which group do you mean?
The Spanish group. Who's the other gentleman?
Ah, no, Ricardo.
No.
Ricardo Gutierrez.
No, not Ricardo.
Alberto.
Yes, thank you. We want to recognize him. He does a beautiful job, as well as all the others. We're all working together on this. It's not one anymore. It's all of us, Mr. Kesh said. So we all learn from each other, and we all support each other, as a family would do. And hopefully there's less arguments and things along that line, where we sort of defer to the others in a way. As Mr. Kesh said, we hear many of you not sometimes correct, but we go along with it anyway until we all seem to learn more, until we discover more. But sometimes they let us go a little bit without so much correction.
How come you didn't remember Alberto? He must be a neighbor of yours, Alberto Feliciano.
Could be, but I'm not aware of that he is.
No, John, Alberto is 3,000 miles away.
But he's still inside the States.
Yes, okay. So's Alaska and Hawaii.
But yes,
Yeah.
that is a beautiful meeting again. And the Brazilian meeting is another beautiful meeting that we can all participate in on Friday evenings, the public session and so on. Lisbeth just put in the chat tomorrow at 3 p.m. USA Eastern Time, starting Jalal's classes. You are welcome. Thank you, Lisbeth. Go ahead.
In fact, in the Spanish group, we've had several simultaneous translators that were very good. We have Uruguayan, I forget his name now, the Peruvian. We have this girl from Colombia that lives in the States also, that used to do all the translation over a year ago.
Yeah, it's almost like making a CO2 or another type of GANs where we're waiting for other knowledge seekers to appear. And it's just like making the GANs. You're waiting, and you start to see it get a little cloudy. And then all of a sudden it starts snowing, let's say, and you see the GANs moving up and down within the cup. So I think we'll see a lot of people in the very near future starting to appear in and around the foundation. They're already there, but for some reason they may be a little hesitant, or they may want to work in the background. But it's all good, and you'll see the knowledge seekers growing by leaps and bounds, especially when some of this technology is made public on a much wider scale.
In fact, Jeanette Orozco, she did all the translations in the congresses, in the latest ones at least.
Okay, with 40 mics or more here, is there anyone who'd like to pose a question, make a statement? We don't want to always have the steering wheel. We want to turn it over to someone else for a while, or as Randy would say, the talking stick. And don't feel embarrassed that your question might be silly or doesn't make any sense. We'll try to put it all together. Again, there's much more of this knowledge ahead of us than we've absorbed as we're learning from these workshops. As Alex said, Mr. Kesh is just going full steam ahead, but he says we're going step by step, but his steps are certainly large steps. And it seems like we're not keeping up, but when we go into these systems, the soul is going to work with us. And again, you're sort of dictating to the soul, or you're going to request, even in the last workshop where he said, hey soul, let's go over here. Hey soul, let's try this. And the soul will, and in one of the workshops he even said, we'll ride our soul across the universe if this is your choice to do. Or you can just go ahead and separate and become a star right away, but you could also become an entire universe as you gather more knowledge and fields as you travel and manifest in these different shapes and positions. Apparently that's part of it, to live longer, to be able to do this.
Hello, Jason here.
Hello, Jason. Where are you from?
I'm from London, Ontario, Canada.
Beautiful. We love Canada.
Yeah, it's a nice spot on planet Earth. I'm speaking up because a few weeks ago, maybe longer, Mr. Kesh put out a call on Telegram asking for people's results on reduction of hydro using MAGRAV system. And I'm just wondering if that has been discussed since and what kind of results there were.
You mean reducing of the electricity bill?
Yes, he put out a call for people to share their electricity bills before and after. to see what kind of results they received. And I was wondering if that's been discussed anywhere. And
I think the foundation is gathering that knowledge and information at this point, but I haven't heard, and I'm not in all the meetings, so I could have missed it. Have you been successful with that, or are you still?
no, gosh, no,
I'm
I've-
still
I've
trying
had-
to create electricity, never mind saving
Well,
on the bill, but
yes, I'm a strange sort. I've got everything I need to make a maggrav, and I have had for years, and I've just have not gotten around to going the full hog and completing a maggrav.
well, very interesting where he said in the video we saw on the new permanent exhibition center is he said, you don't come in here to make anything. We're going to feed your brain, I think he said, or words to that extent. And he said, you leave the matter state outside, and then you'll come into a more of a field environment. I understand it a little bit, but not sure what he's alluding to there. We're going to feed you through, and I know he says this, he does this through the fields.
Yes, and that's a big leap from just showing someone, look, my electricity costs me 50% less, for instance.
And it has been
Talking-
achieved. I know in different countries, we've heard the reports, and there's probably many more that may not want to be identified for
Yes.
whatever reason.
Well, I myself had an acquaintance whose father's friend was acquainted with Mr. Cash and Magravs, and he built a Magrav and he hooked it up to his system in his house here in Ontario, and he had London Hydro knock on his door and say, or not London Hydro, well, Hydro One knock on his door and say, what's going on? So it's just been a long time since that's been discussed. I was just wondering if that's been covered at all recently.
If you are looking, Jason, to save, he said the elusive power units are now back and ready to be released. And I don't know if they're 100% ready to be released, but he said we will be releasing this elusive power unit. So they are in the store and you can order them.
Yes.
Can I make a comment, please?
Please, Alex.
So I'm very glad that you haven't built one. I likewise haven't built one either. And like you say, people knocked on his door. You see, because when you hook it up to the mains, there's a 5-to-1 ratio, roughly speaking, where you take 1, but you feed back 5. And so that was noticed on the lines because they have measuring equipment. I just want to clarify another point. In Canada, we call it hydro, which means electricity.
Okay.
In the US, hydro is the water bill. And so they call it the electric company in the US. But in Canada, only recently have we started paying for our water. And so that we call the water company, and hydro we still call electricity. You see, because a long time ago, when the earth was green, we had hydroelectric power, and in fact, the surplus we were selling to the United States. And the beauty about the electric power is that it comes from the waterfalls, and we had a lot of waterfalls. And so the power company was encouraging us to use hydro so that we could have the benefits in our creature comforts. But then we had a gentleman who became the head of the largest hydro company in Ontario, Ontario Hydro, and he did a terrific job of bankrupting the company. And if you understand finances, when you declare bankruptcy, then your debts are dissolved and you start from scratch, right? There are a few debts that you can't dissolve, but nevertheless, the majority of debts are dissolved. Well, in the hydro debt, they burdened the people of Ontario with that debt and called it a carrying charge. So a lot of people who were paying, say, between $10 and $50 for hydro are now paying maybe $200 a month for carrying charges plus the hydro. And that would be cheap. And there is a discrimination between the urban centers and the rural centers. So we in the rural centers pay almost twice as much as the urban centers. So our hydro bill would be a lot higher than Jason's hydro bill. But nevertheless, this is one of the reasons we don't hook it up to the mains. And so that's okay. But there's another problem, of course, and that had to do with the number of people who would hook up and what that would do to the hydro company. And that would be extremely detrimental. So a few people could have, shall we say, reduced energy cost, but the rest of us would be blacked out. And that's not a good thing. So this has been the dilemma. Now, the other way to do that, of course, is just to get off the grid. And there's a lot of companies who want to get off the grid, and that's kind of a good thing. So, you know, we get into solar energy and other energies. It should be noted that the hydro energy was one of the most efficient, most cost-effective, and most ubiquitous sources in Canada. In Canada, we have the largest amount of water surface area per capita of any country in the world. So that's why we had a hydroelectric station. And you know, when Tesla created the AC power for the power grid in North America, he built that at Niagara Falls, one of the wonders of the world. And he did that over 100 years ago, which is pretty amazing. He also invented the cell phone over 100 years ago. So that's also pretty amazing. So it's taken over a century for us to advance to the next level. And so here we are. So how do we bridge that gap to go from the physical delivery of energy to plasma energy without having a detrimental impact on our society? And so that subject came up this past Thursday. You know, what happens, what then, right? You introduce this and then what then? And so you find that a lot of people are irresponsible because they just look at their own thing, you know, what you call the NIMBY crowd, not in my backyard, right? So as long as I'm okay, everything's okay. I don't care about you because you don't matter. But you know what, when your neighbor is sick and your neighbor can't work, or, you know, your neighbor dies, they make lousy customers. And this is the problem. We have a economic crisis right now. So this responsibility that we have as knowledge seekers in the Keshe Foundation extends beyond health. It extends beyond energy and transportation and communication. It's going to affect our society. Overall, it's going to be very, very good. But for too many people, tomorrow they have to pay the rent, or tomorrow they have to pay the mortgage, or tomorrow they're going to be evicted. You know.
But if you sell me one apple and I pay for it and I give you 3 beautiful apples back, I don't see why anyone would refuse that. I wouldn't have to go to my supplier to buy more apples.
I know, but you're being logical. Okay, that's the problem. You're being logical. Business doesn't work that way. Okay, business is all about profit, and profit, you know, who profits the most is the shareholders from the company. So, you know, can you be profitable without selling steaks? Can you be profitable by only selling the sizzle? When you don't have substance, then you have superficiality. And our society is based on superficiality. Okay. So, you know, we have cosmetics, we have fashion, you know, you have no money in the bank, you can't provide for your family, but you have an expensive car. Okay. Because looking good is more important than being good. That's the North American way.
I see
And
that.
I could say that I can say that as a North American. So, you know, when I'm being condescending, you know, if I look at when I was a teenager and I look at now and I compare the society, I have not seen progress. In fact, I have seen degradation. The society today is nowhere near as good as what it was, despite the fact we have technological advances. Why? Because the moral decay has increased. So we've gotten to the point where the moral decay is obvious and it's still continuing. You know, at least, you know, in the past, if I were to rob someone, you know, I'd want to run away and hide so that I don't get caught. Now they're doing it in broad daylight. And this is, you know, because not only is irresponsibility been cultivated, but desperation is also set in. And so, you know, you have people who are breaking the law, but this is man-made law that they're breaking. Why? Because we all are seeking emotional and physical harmony. And if you are on the verge of starvation or having your hydro cut off, or, you know, heaven forbid, don't get the cable cut off, because if you have the cable, you won't be able to entertain yourself. So, you know, we have our priorities, but I'll tell you what, when you lose your health, you lose everything. And that's why the cups of life are so important. And that's why I keep harping on it every week. Build your cups of life, understand how they work, and make sure that they're part of your life, because today you may be okay, but maybe tomorrow you'll have problems, and you need to be ready. Preparation is always done in advance. Thanks for your comments, Jason, and just get ready, okay, because the changes are coming.
I understand that very, very clearly. But I am alone in a big flock of sheep, if you will.
Well, this probably, go ahead, Jason.
To introduce the one cup has been very, very difficult. Perhaps as a result of my own shortcomings. But it's seen as poison in a way.
Okay, Jason, let me tell you something.
I guess why I asked about the magravs is because that's very early on in my understanding of all of this. And of course, the gas came as a product of the magrav. So it's just trying to, if I could show my stepfather, for instance, a reduced hydro bill, he might not be so hesitant to drink a bottle of plasma water. That's where I'm coming from. I'm thank you. Yes, please.
No, I'm not trying to cut you short. I want to add something for the audience here. First of all, so they know where you live. So in your community is one of the largest cancer hospitals, very famous. In your community is a very famous large university where attendance is restricted with the passport. One of my friends works at that university and I can't reach him, but he is self-made in terms of the knowledge of physics. He's an author, he's a professor, and he has, you know, quite the reputation. And I thought, well, wouldn't that be nice if I could contact him and explain to him what I'm doing, you know, with the Keshe Foundation. And, you know, shall we say, and I've listened to some of his seminars, and it's, you know, it's almost painful because there are gaps of knowledge, you know, and inside these gaps, all I have to do is just put a little bridge. And I'm sure with his education and understanding that he could just cross over that bridge and link all these things up, but it can't get to him. Okay?
Alex.
Hi,
everyone. Alex, question about the gap. Can I?
Yeah.
I wonder why the grid take 5 times more. Don't answer. Something to think about. What is the law of the plasma?
Stronger.
Yeah. Something to think about. Thank you.
All cups will be full.
And this is what we're going to see in the future as well with the universal units. You want to run for president of your country? Have you been processed? You want to be in charge of the electrical grid for the nation? Have you gone through the unit? You want to be head of the healthcare conglomerate? Have you been processed? These are what's going to happen. And again, I think once we elevate the souls, things will really work out much better. And this whole idea of greed and taking and shareholder profit will be a secondary thought to many that have been processed. And that's what Mr. Keshe said. They're going to ask these politicians, have you gone through the unit?
So I want to add one more idea, please, to complete the thought. And that's exactly that. You see, if we transcend to a higher energy level, our success in transferring this knowledge will be far greater. So by not being able to go into the details is not disqualifying ourselves from crossing the bridge. We have an inherent knowledge, and that knowledge is owned by our souls. So if we can engage our souls into proper conduct, then that energy transfer will be more abundant. That's where the energy flow comes in. So the sequence to start with a physical manifestation, energy transfer, as much as everybody is looking for that, the only reason they're looking for that is because of our overall overwhelming dependence on our physical existence. If we could understand our plasma existence better and understand that the plasma energy feeds the physical energy, then we can have this, shall we say, physical manifestation and have it manifest in its proper way. We are on the verge of chaos, and that is not acceptable. So and I'll be talking about that in a few more weeks. I just want to identify that we can do energy transfer at different energy levels, and the higher the level, the higher the transfer rate by many orders of magnitude. And that's what we're trying to achieve. So we will be doing that with the enhancement units. And we know with the enhancement units, of course, they're not running on hydro or electricity. And in fact, he announced, didn't he announce, Mark, that they've taken the computers away also?
Yes, you will need no satellites and no internet to operate these.
Okay, so accept that, be aware, accept it, understand it, and know it. Oh, I hope.
Could I ask Alex to finish the story about his friend, the physicist who lives in my hometown?
I can't get to him.
Right. So that's like, how did you leave it with him? You've approached him with the ideas, and he's put up a wall.
I don't know what happened there, but another thing Mr. Kesh mentioned about the MagRev is we all went for the crumbs instead of the cake. So
Yes.
I haven't even gotten to the crumbs yet, but
No, it's just exactly. Exactly.
Alex, where did you go? I see one of your, apparently he's left on one of his systems here, so I don't think he can hear you, Jason, but I'm not sure. Alex, you need to come back in. Let me, yeah, he's lost the screen. Let me put the regular background back up. We're seeing your picture, Jason. Okay, there we go.
Hello, Mark, I'm back. I got thrown out.
No problem. No problem at all. He was asking, Jason, do you want to repose?
No, I heard the question.
Oh, you did. Thank you.
I left a message on his email, and I've called several times, and there's no response. So, as you know, in Ontario, we've been locked down very badly. So there's no communication whatsoever. So can't get from here to there. It's there's a barrier.
But at least you've planted seeds, and I'm sure those plasmatic seeds are working within him right now.
That's the only thing I can count on.
Yeah, no question.
I crossed the barrier with a similar individual 6-7 years ago, and he went with me full bore to get me whatever he could to make GANs. And then the universe took him. So that was a big loss 6 years ago, sorry. And it was great that I could make that junction with him, because he was so skeptical. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for